was a lot of information. Now, I just have the best honor of introducing you to Bridget Butler, who I came to hear about through our teaching staff at the Harris Center, who were lucky enough to attend a conference where Bridget was a speaker. And every single one of them came back saying, this is phenomenal. Bridget is amazing. And the ideas behind slow birding are revolutionary. They're just make you look at birds in a whole new way. And so tonight we're really lucky to have Bridget, who's been a naturalist for over 20 years, with most of her work focused in Vermont, but I have a feeling she's about to go national or international. So Bridget, let's have you take it away. And thank you so much for coming tonight.
Susie, thank you so much for having me. And I have to put an extra shout out to your education staff. You know, you guys came back with these ideas that I shared at the educators conference, and Janet Altabello, one of your members on staff, wrote a slow birding piece. And I just thought, gosh, this is my opportunity to take this outside of Vermont. And so I'm grateful for our connection and what we get to do together over the next couple of months. And I'm so happy all of you are here. This is incredible. I'm looking at folks from all over the United States, and I'm going to do a shout out to Andrea, who's in Germany. And if you scroll up in the chat box, you can read about how Andrea is joining us tonight, which is just great. You know, one of the silver linings of the pandemic and all of us being pushed to kind of hang out online together is our circles have grown. And so it's really kind of cool to all be able to be here together tonight. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to make sure that I have some audio too when I share. So make sure you have your audio settings all turned up so you'll be able to hear the bird sound in this. And Susie, I can see you right now. Can you give me a thumbs up that you can see that screen really well? Great. And just like Susie said, please feel free to put stuff in the chat box. I'm actually going to ask you at different times to participate through the chat box. So now is also a great time to like rearrange things, which is what I'm doing right now, so that you can see the chat as we hang out together tonight. So tonight you're all here to learn about slow birding, and I'm really excited to share this practice with you. And so what we will be doing is learning about what it is, where it kind of came from, and then I'm going to kind of break it down into a couple of different chunks and give you some skills to take away tonight to put into practice. And if you really like this, like Susie said, there is a whole 4-week course coming up in May, which is like prime time for birding, where you can dive into this a little bit deeper. All right, so here we go. So the first thing that I want to share a little bit with you is my journey as a birder. Some people may have heard this story before. And you know that I was not into birders or bird watching when I first became a naturalist. In fact, I found most birders snooty and obnoxious, and they were competitive and really not fun to be around. And I thought, geez, well, this is not what I really want to get into and dive a little bit deeper into. And it wasn't until I moved to Vermont and started working for Audubon Vermont that I found a crew of people who were more open about how they connected with nature. They were excited to share their knowledge. They weren't protective of the spots where they were finding birds. And it just became a lot more fun. And over the years, I started to notice what was working and what wasn't working for me as a birder. And I did the typical thing, right? Join lots of bird walks, keep a list of birds, make a life list. And then I was like, well, there's got to be something more here. And as I got further into building my skills, I got better at recognizing the birds that were around me, but it always came really, really hard. And I thought there's got to be some other way to do this. And around that time, I became a mom and I had 3 kids and I couldn't go out birding as much as I used to. And so I started to see birding through their eyes. And I also started birding closer to home. And this is where I really started to develop these ideas about how can we learn how to observe birds and be with birds in a different way? And how can it not be about this competitive piece? Where can I find kind of the happy medium? And so this is what I kind of started to come up with. There were a bunch of different things that really appealed to me. I started to experience birding with folks from White Pine program in Maine, and they were teaching bird language, which comes out of John Young's work. He's the author of What the Robin Knows. And they were really looking at how birds used vocalizations to tell you what was happening on the land. And it was very deeply tied into tracking and place-based knowledge of the land that you were on. So really, I started to think about, well, what if I just birded where I was at? And what if I got to know the birds that were around me all the time a little bit better? And what if I spent time with one bird instead of trying to figure out all birds and driving around and going from place to place to see different birds? And how can I fine tune my observation skills and deepen my awareness and appreciation for what was happening around me? And what else is there than naming a bird? There's got to be something else. And that's when I really started to get into noticing and interpreting behaviors. So all of these things kind of started to come together and form a different practice, a different approach to birding for me. This also made me think, well, who kind of made birding what it is today, and how did we get there? And what I discovered is that birding's typically very male-centric and dominated by biologists and scientists that are very specific and analytical and logistically thinking. And I thought that can't all be all there was. There had to be some women out there that were exploring this as well. And that's when I discovered these three women. And I've started to dive in a little bit deeper into researching what they've done and the stories that we're missing from how they experienced birds and how they studied birds. So the three women that I've been focusing on kind of catching up with are Florence Marion Bailey, Olive Thorne Miller, and Mabel Osgood Wright. These are the women that I kind of think of as the founding mothers of birding. In fact, Florence Marion Bailey was actually one of the first people to use the term birding in her writing. Roger Tory Peterson even acknowledged that in some of his writing. So one of the things that all three of these women had in common is they were very tied into birding from wherever they were, whether it was home. A lot of them they traveled. They were all born in the East. I think all three of them were born in upstate New York, actually. And then they traveled west with a lot of these skills that they developed right at home. And Florence, one of the best quotes that I have from Florence that I just love so much, made me think, geez, I'm not the first person who ever slow birded. Florence actually traveled out west. She wrote this great book called A Birding on a Bronco. She dragged a chair, a camp chair, a folding camp chair that she attached to her horse's saddle out into the woods with her so that she could sit and be with the birds. She actually said in one of her books, the best way of all to get to know birds is to select a good place and just sit there quietly for several hours and see what will come. Then you get at the home life of birds. All three of these women were birding in a time when most of the folks who were studying birding were men, and the way that they were studying birds was by shooting them and collecting them. It's right around the same time when women were wearing fancy hats with dead birds on them. And all three of these women were key and core in that movement to start the Audubon Society and look at ways to conserve and protect birds from ending up on people's hats. But that's another story for another time. But that's the roots of slow birding as I've come to know it. So why slow bird? Just a bunch of different reasons. For me, it's about building a deeper skill set. The way that I learned birding was really based on identification through plumage and then vocalizations. And I was missing all of these other pieces. And what I want to do is bring all these other pieces back into how we build our skills to be able to observe and kind of connect with what we're seeing on the land. Part of it is developing a calm appreciation. When your intent is not to search and find, which is really interesting. When you're on a bird walk, you're kind of pushing your energy out there. It's almost like you're in hunter mode, right? Because you have this intention to see certain birds. When you dial that back and you sit, like Florence said, and the birds come back into you, it's a very calming experience. It's actually a tool for good health. Can't tell you how much my slow birding practice saved me over and over again during the start of the pandemic. And the other piece that I really like about slow birding is it gives you a deeper connection with place. When we're chasing birds and we're trying to find different unique things and we're not noticing the common and the miraculous right near us, we kind of get taken away from the place that we live. And I'll share some stuff with you about what I've learned about my place. In fact, here we go. Let's talk about my place. This is my backyard. This is a number of years ago. My kids are really small here. They are now 7, 8, and 9. This is our backyard. And once I started birding in place, I learned a lot about the birds that were coming through our yard. And one of the first things I did was really start to think about who are the birds that are in my neighborhood that I see every day, and how can I use them as a foundation for building awareness and deeper skills. So I call these birds our usual suspects. And what I try to do is get people to think, what are my 5 usual suspects? What are the 5 birds that I can see on a regular basis that I can use as a foundation for my skill set when it comes to being with birds? The other piece that I like to look at are seasonal changes. When I am in my backyard and I am on my sit spot, which I'll show you where it is in just a second, I can notice seasonal changes throughout the year and tie my knowledge of birds in with those seasonal changes. Now, once you develop this practice, you can take it wherever and whenever you like and try your best to be in that moment with birds. So we're going to start by developing a sit spot in our backyard. If you haven't ever done a sit spot before, it's a practice that a lot of environmental educators use. Basically, it's staying in one place for an extended period of time. With kids, we start out like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and then we stretch it out even more. With adults, what I try to say is try to do 20 minutes. Start there and then expand. So we're going to go 20 minutes a day, and we're going to find a spot. This is the most important thing. Find a spot that's close to home, that's easy to access. So for me, my sit spot is literally right out my back door. So right on the steps out my back door is where I like to hang out. I take my notebook there. I draw pictures. I have drawn maps of my yard to figure out where the spots are that the birds like. And I go there often. My goal is to spend 20 minutes a day on my sit spot. Sometimes there's no birds, sometimes there's a ton of birds, but every time there's that calmness and that appreciation that happens for that spot that I am in. All right, are you ready to participate? So open up that chat box, all right? And here is our first thing that we're going to do together. So I want you to take a moment. You can either jot this down yourself or you can fire it off in the chat box. I want you to think about what are 5 birds. See if you can get to 5. What are the 5 birds that you recognize in your neighborhood? Maybe you don't even know the name. You could call it the black bird with the yellow beak, right? Call it whatever you want, but see if you could be like, okay, there's these 5 birds that I know really well. Let's see what pops up in the chat. I can't wait to see what comes in from Germany and Ohio and Oregon. All right, nice job. There's Janet's coming in with cardinal and blue jay. All right, super Ruth. All right, robin, chickadee, downy, woodpecker, titmice, nuthatch. There's Kate out in Oregon. Oh, I got to scroll up because look at you guys just firing them off. Buick's wren, crows, scrub jay, Cooper's hawk, red-shouldered hawk. I love this. We're getting some birds of prey in there. You can already see, if you're following the chat, right, we've got sets of birds that are here year round in your spot. I can't say here because some of you are there, right? And we have predators, right? And we have songbirds. Anybody from the ocean? I'm not seeing any like waterfowl in here yet. Sparrows, nuthatch, good, good, great. So our bird of prey in our neighborhood is Cooper's hawk and merlin. Awesome. Pair of mallards. Okay, there's Sandy. Sandy's got some ducks. Good, right? So this connects us with place, and it helps us really start to think about what are the types of habitats that are around me and what's possible, right? So I see Linda here says hermit thrush. Linda must be someplace near where there's a good amount of forest. That's great. Hooded mergansers. Oh my gosh, so beautiful. All right. So the idea here is to build this foundation of birds that you can really start to get to know and practice some of these things that I'm going to share with you. So this is like my set of birds from my yard. And what's really cool is these birds, they become easy to recognize once you figure out who's who. They're accessible. They're the ones that you're going to see every day. And you can build a basis for your birding adventures from these birds. So here we have two resident birds. We have black-capped chickadee and northern cardinal. Those two are here year round. And then we have American robin, which is a short distance migrant. And we have song sparrow, which is another migratory bird. These guys are all over the place in my yard right now. And so this is my core set of usual suspects that I'm going to build off of. And we're going to kind of play around with these a little bit as we go through the rest of the talk. One of the things that's really great to pay attention to, and I love to start people birding in the wintertime, because during the winter, we have a smaller subset of birds to start to learn and to get to know. And then as we move into this time of year, we're going to start to see a number of different birds come into play. They may be birds that are going to stick around. They may be birds that are going to be passing through. So this slide shows you a little snapshot of some common birds in my area. And this is from eBird. It's a platform that birders use to report what they're seeing. But what's great about it is it gives you all this great information back. So these are what we call histograms. And basically these little green bars show us the frequency with which birds are reported each week of each month of the year. So each of these months is divided up into 4 little rectangles. The taller the rectangle is, the more reports we get of that bird during that week during the year. The smaller that box is, so like if you look at, let's go down to like, well, common raven is really nice as we travel across that one, right? So we have these little thin lines and then a little bit fatter. It's not one that people see really super often. Horned lark is not in here at all. Okay, so this is a way that we can kind of follow when birds are here and when they're not. Black-capped chickadee, totally year round, okay? So by going to this place over and over, your sit spot that's right nearby you, you're gonna start to notice seasonal changes. It's really part of the puzzle in figuring out who's who. And paying attention to this can really be a great cue on when to look, which is what I love right now. So here's something I would love for you to adopt and try. This is our backyard big year list. It's on a giant Post-it note in our sunroom. This is from 2018. And basically what we do is we start at the beginning of the year, and each day we pay attention and we write down any new bird that's not already on the list. We change the color for each day, so it's color coded visually, gives you that visual. And what's great is this one. So this is before my kids were writing. It's really funny now to look at this because my husband participates too. He even trash talks me a little bit when he sees birds before I do, which is hysterical. But we're all participating. The rule is you can see it from your yard or you can hear it from the yard. It can be in a neighbor's yard, but you have to be standing in the yard or in the house to hear it or see it. So we've been doing this for about 7 years now. So these are our averages. 61 is the average number of species that we've had over those 7 years. Last year, of course, because of the pandemic, we're home all the time, we crushed our previous record of 62 species with 73 species. That's the highest number of species we've ever seen in a year. And the total number of species we have for my tiny half-acre backyard on the edge of a rural city in northern Vermont is 93 species of birds. It is amazing. If you had ever told me that I was going to see some of these birds on here, they don't breed in our yard, they just move through. If someone had told me I was going to see that many species, I never would have guessed that, even as an experienced birder. And it wasn't until I slowed down and I started to look that I really was kind of blown away by what's possible and what's right outside my back door. What's even cooler about this now is after 7 years, I now know when to expect certain birds. So we can go back. I put all this in a spreadsheet because I totally geek out on it. I can go back and say, hey, Baltimore Orioles probably supposed to show up this week. And it's really kind of cool because you can see the dates are very close together. You can also see when they shift. So this is a great way to kind of start to build upon your usual suspects. When you know your usual suspects, then when somebody new comes into the yard, you're like, oh, who's that? That's somebody different. And it's so magic right now as new stuff starts to come in and move through. All right, let's move on. I'm going to throw some more skills at you here. The other part of slow birding that I started to think about was how I learned and how much time it took for me to learn how to identify birds. And part of it was, really trying to get to know different species. And everybody was telling me, this is what you have to look at. You've got to look at plumage. You've got to look at the primaries and the secondaries and the blah, blah, blah. And then you've got the molts and the, oh my gosh, I thought my head was going to explode. And what I've discovered is that you can look at a bird, but are you really seeing that bird? And have we really helped each other learn how to observe at a deeper level? And I really don't think we have. So I'm going to push you again. Are you ready for another participatory piece? Here we go. Most of us know blue jay. If you are out west, in Germany, I don't know what's similar to a jay. I think you have jays in Germany or somebody in the jay family. So I want you to think of a bird in the jay family. For us in the Northeast, it's blue jay. I want you to picture it in your mind. And then I want you to type into the chat or make notes. If you want to share, that's fine. How would you describe that bird to someone who has never seen it before? How are you going to describe that bird to someone who's never seen it before? Police bird. Nice. All right. Yeah, it's the one that's like, I know what you're talking about there. Blue mohawk. Oh my gosh, I love that. Blue mohawk, black eyeliner. Yes. Okay, Katie's going to do scrub jay. No crest, blue overall, gray bib. Great. Janet Lapointe says mid-size, not too big, not too small. I love this, Janet. We're going to build Jane. Not too big, not too small. We're going to build off of that. Deep bright with white markings and a crest. Good crest. There's a jay hiding things on my balcony every day. Yay. All right. Medium-sized gregarious bird. Yes, Phil, with blue, white, black, and a raised crest and a long tail. Okay. Phil's saying long. I want you to remember some of these things. It's big. It's long. It's small. Oh, okay. How does that work? Oh, Patricia, this is great. Beautiful, bold, and saucy, colorfully blue. Awesome. So here's the thing. I've done this with both blue jay and robin, and it's amazed me when I ask people to turn to each other and describe these birds. It's harder than you think to describe it to someone. And that's because we don't really have common language for how we describe things. So one of the things that's starting to happen in the birding world is we're shifting how we describe what we see. And we're starting to come up with common ways to talk about what we're seeing. There's this great book that's through the Peterson Institute. It's called Birding by Impression. It's by Dale Roslett and Kevin Carlson. It's a fabulous book. And what they talk about is really focusing on things that don't change. So don't go to plumage first. Focus on the unchanging characteristics of a bird. If we focus on plumage, plumage changes throughout the year. We have winter plumage, we have summer plumage, we have breeding plumage, we have immature plumage, we have in-between stuff, right? We've got all of that, male and female plumage, right? But if we base our observations on things like size, and we're going to talk about size relative to what, shape, the shapes that we're seeing, the structure of the bird, and then behavior. We're going to add that way at the end. Okay. These are things, Susie, thank you so much. She just dropped a link to the book in the chat box. These are things that we can use. So with a blue jay, some of the things that were coming through were crest. Okay. That's great. Big or small. We've got to get a way to talk about big and small relative to what. Phil said long tail, long relative to what? And how can we measure those things with our eyes and learn how to do that? So let's talk about that for a few minutes. Oh my gosh, here's another like super cute bird, right? Oh my goodness. Look at the structure on that bird, like completely different shape. If you know this bird, this is in the wren, this is a wren, it's in the wren family, right? Different size, different shape. Gosh, look at the toes. Big, long toes, super. So one of the things I started to think about is how can I teach people to take a deeper look and go beyond the plumage, almost like black out the plumage and really start to look at some of these things that don't change. So we really need to think about how our brain works and how we can engage both sides of our brain. We really need to think about how to get to know a bird, which really means dirt time, getting out on that sit spot and watching that bird over and over again. What does it look like in the winter? What does it look like in the summer? And then applying some of these birding by impression techniques. One of the things I discovered as I started to try to articulate what slow birding was for me and why it's different than regular birding, I started to learn a little bit more about how our left and our right brain works. And actually, Kevin Carlson and Dale Roslett talk about this a little bit in Birding by Impression. And so both sides of our brain really do help us kind of process visual information when we're looking at something. So the left side of the brain is really analytical. It's like linear thinking, the logical conclusion. It really depends on descriptive words and details. So this is like book brain thinking, describing and memorizing plumage. And memorization can be really hard. What we don't do enough of that I try to incorporate into slow birding is nonlinear, holistic thinking. So we're looking at the whole picture of the bird in order to form an impression. And what's really great about this, right? It takes a little bit more time, but it's much more robust information that then kind of sticks in our subconscious memory, and we can access it even quicker than when we are using things that we've memorized. It's almost instantly accessible. You may have had an experience like this before. So there was this one time after I dropped my kids off at day camp one day, and I was like free for the day. And I was like, yes, this is awesome. And I'm like driving down this back road and I'm probably going a little bit too fast. I got the radio cranked up. My mind's on something else. And out of the corner of my eye, I see a bird on a wire and my brain goes, shrike, northern shrike. And it was like, turn around, you got to go see that bird, because that's not a regular bird that we see around here all the time. How did I know that that was a shrike? Most of the time I see them in the winter. This was like late spring. What is going on here? Why did my brain all of a sudden kick in? And it was because some of the experiences that I had with a shrike were so deep and so detailed that that subconscious part of my brain immediately recognized that silhouette, that shape, that behavior of sitting on the wire, and told me that that's what that was. So when you get to this point where you're engaging both parts of your brain and looking at birds, it kind of does this magic thing for you where stuff just immediately pops in and helps you connect with whatever you're seeing. All right, So let's build that. We're going to go back, think back to that blue jay. I want you to think back to that blue jay for a minute. In this box, if you were to describe the size of the blue jay, how could you describe it by using these three birds? Try it in the chat box. How would you describe the size of the blue jay using sparrow, robin, or crow? This is where I get a sip of coffee while you're like typing in the chat box. There we go. There we go. That's what I'm talking about. So bigger than a robin, in between crow and robin. Super, right? So we can use other birds as like a measuring device, okay? And some of these birds are our core birds, our usual suspects. They're the birds that we see in our neighborhood all the time, right? So we could say bigger than a robin and smaller than a crow. You might put goose up there at the very end, like what's your big giant bird that you're going to compare up and down with, okay? So when we start to look at birds, let's start to think about them in relation to common birds that we know. So sparrow, robin, crow. One of the things that was cool that happened to me as I was developing some deeper birding skills and trying to let go of the fact that I couldn't bird like I normally did all the time. I couldn't rush off and like just see whatever I wanted to. I started to try to be in the moment with birds. And this size thing and looking at characteristics that don't change really came into play when I was walking my kids to the bus stop every morning. It was something that I was doing every day. So it was a repeated behavior on my part through the seasons that I was going to get to experience common birds that are there all the time in a new way. So routine, seasonal. I wasn't bringing my binoculars with me every day. So that totally forced me to look more specifically. And one of the things I struggled with a lot was blackbirds. Blackbirds are hard. There's all a bunch of different kinds of blackbirds. Rusty blackbird, red-winged blackbirds, starlings look like blackbirds, crows look like blackbirds from a distance, which is what you have in this picture here with the big tall pine and the crows in the tree. They're far away, but they look black and it's some kind of blackbird, right? And so I started to play around with how I was looking and how I was playing around with challenging my brain. I was also playing around with my kids. So one of the things we would do is we went out to the bus stop every morning and is I would say, what's your prediction for the first bird that we're going to hear or see when we walk outside? This is a great game to play with yourself. Challenges you to think of that list of birds that you are going to see that are common in your neighborhood and figure out who's vocalizing right now. Who's moving around? Who's nesting in my front yard? And if you take this to next level, when you go to a new habitat, you should be making those same predictions. Who will I see in this place? Who's common here? Who breeds here? Who is going to be vocalizing here? Then you have a little subset of birds that you're already ready for, okay? So great game to play right nearby. Bus stop birding, good stuff. Who do you see in the parking lot when you get to work in the morning, if you're still going to work? Who do you see when you walk out to get the paper, when you walk out to get the mail? This is a blurry picture. That's okay. You know why? Because sometimes birds are blurry. Sometimes you forget to bring your glasses outside. I do that all the time. Think of it as a challenge, right? So here we have 4 different types of blackbirds just in silhouette. So this is where we start thinking about size and shape and lengths. So Phil was talking about the tail is long on the blue jay. Well, what's long? One of the best ways to think about tail length is to think about tail length in relation to body length, okay? So take a shot at this. This comes from, oh, where did I get this? This is a silhouette, slow down, Bridget. Too much iced coffee. Silhouette plate from Early Peterson's Guide to Birds. It's on the inside cover, okay? So take a shot. See if you can put in the chat box the number of the bird and what you think it might be. Yeah, I'll try that. And I apologize to the European folks who are joining us tonight because I'm not sure. Actually, you know what? You have some of these birds and they are declining where you are, which is really kind of interesting. All right, so let's see. We got some good guesses coming in. I see Yes, I actually see all 4 of these birds in my neighborhood. Awesome. Good, good, good. Here we go. So we've got a bunch of different guesses coming in. Number 5, so we'll go in order. Number 3, okay, check out this shape, really super long tail in relation to the length of the body, right? The bill you can do the same thing with, bill length in relation to the width of the head. Then you can get at long and short. Is it as wide as the head? Is it shorter than the width of the head? Okay, so number 3 is grackle. We have all different kinds, different species of grackle, right? But this is our basis, grackle, long tail in relation to the length of the body and a long, narrow beak in relation to the width of the head, okay? This is how I finally got starling down. Yes, Nadia's Lake, number 4, starling. Yes, so look at that tail. It's totally chopped off. Now, I don't even need the bird to be lit up. I can just look at the tail. Grackle, starling. It's awesome. Okay, so European starling is number 4. Good. Now we get into the tricky place, right? So look at the beaks on number 5 and 6. Okay, so 5 has a totally different shaped beak. It's more like a sparrow beak, like a conical beak. Okay, so this one is brown-headed cowbird. Okay. Little notch in the tail. Oh, isn't that interesting? If you start looking at tails, maybe one day on your sit spot, you just look at tails all day. And then number 6 is blackbird. You could say red-winged blackbird. You could say rusty blackbird. Maybe we need to start studying the silhouette of different species of blackbird, right? Rusty versus red-wing, right? Those are the deeper dives that you can start to get into as you start to play around with this birding by impression and slow birding. All right. I'm switching gears on you. Come with me, because you cannot leave out the vocalizations. This is key, okay? But listening can be super challenging, and oh my gosh, it can be a cacophony of sound that's just completely overwhelming, okay? So I'm gonna give you some things to play around with, to try out. Deeper listening, right? So we're going to talk about 5 voices. We're going to talk about some simple sounds. There's 7 of them that we'll just kind of touch on, and a language for listening. This is the other thing that we don't do well, that we're starting to do well. There's another new book. Okay, Susie, are you ready to Google this one? All right, this is Nathan Pieplow. Oh, I'm going to zoom to my bookshelf. I'm going to zoom back. A field guide to bird sounds of Eastern North America. So Nathan Pieplow has this great book, okay? And he's breaking down a language for listening. But let's start with 5 voices. So this comes from a great book called What the Robin Knows by John Young. This changed how I listened to bird songs and calls, because it gave me songs and calls. What was I doing before? I was only listening to songs, to the breeding songs of birds in order to identify them. And there's so much else that's going on. Let's not ignore that. Let's enjoy that. So the 5 voices break down into 2 songs and 3 calls. Songs tend to be more longer, more melodic, and they are used for 2 different purposes, for mating and for territory, okay? So if you think of Robin doing the cheerio, cheery me, cheerio, right? So that is that song that we hear commonly when they are on territory and they are trying to attract a mate. Now, if you bump that up, get up really, or get woken up really early in the morning by them, it's almost like they've had as much coffee as I have had today. And the song just goes wicked fast. It's like cheerio, cheery me, cheerio. It's super fast and super tight. That's because that bird is waking up and saying, this is my spot. I am going to be here all day protecting my mate and finding food, right? So that's that shift in that, how that bird uses that song. So longer, more melodic, it's most likely a song. Calls tend to be shorter, and they can have different intensities. And when you sit on your sit spot over and over again, you're going to get to know these calls. If we think about how we just came out of winter and we heard all those little chip calls from different birds that were moving back and forth to the feeder or through the woods while we were snowshoeing, right? So these are contact calls. These are little short notes that they vocalize with to stay in touch with one another. Chickadees are great, right? Because they do the chickadee thing. Someone goes chickadee back and chickadee. So they're staying in touch with one another. Okay. Now the chickadee switches and drops the chick and goes straight to D and is going dee 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 dee, and it's intense. You can feel it. That's an alarm call. Something is going on that is disrupting that bird from that calm chickadee dee dee thing, right? So we can listen for that. The other one is a food or begging call. This is what I hear or used to hear when my kids got off the bus at the end of the day. Wee, 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 wee. My kids didn't do that. They just like yelled for cheese sticks and stuff like that. But they were cranky and they were hungry and, you know, that kind of call, right? So later, as we shift into June and July, we're going to hear begging calls on the landscape from young birds. Once I started to sit and listen for a song versus call, kind of opened up a whole new world. And when I started listening for alarm calls, I started noticing all kinds of crazy new things. So one of the ways that we have kind of failed each other is by not having good words to describe what we're hearing. And of course, everybody perceives things a little bit differently. But if we can start to use some common terminology, and I'm going to give you just a couple here tonight that will work for how you can tease apart what you're listening to. It's great when you're notating this, if you can write down some of these simple sounds, because they'll help you figure out or get to know the bird that you're interested in. So everybody try this with me, and I can see a couple people. You don't have to unmute, but I do want to see you trying. So I won't tell you who I can see, which would be kind of funny. I put you on the spot. So the first one is whistled. If you can whistle the song. So that's chickadee. Think of, let's see, who else can do? Northern Cardinal is a whistled song. That's my terrible impression of a cardinal. But guess what? That's engaging the right side of my brain right now. And that is what's helping me kind of grasp and remember that song. Hoots and coos, think of mourning dove, the woo, 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 woo. Okay, that's another way. So a hoot or a coo. And I'm going to drop down. There's a bunch of different ones on here. Nasal, something that's distorted here. I'll play a distorted one here. We've got a little wren here. Listen, take a listen to this one. I'm going to play that one more time. I want you to listen to the very beginning. So we have an agitated wren in the front, right? That's alarm. You can almost feel that intensity. But listen in the background, the pair to this bird is actually singing. It's doing the truly, truly, truly. All right, let's play this again. There we go. So something that's distorted, wrens tend to sound distorted. Polyphonic, if you can hum while you're whistling. If you think of any bird in the thrush family, except for robins, but hermit, veery, Swainsons, bicknells, those guys, they have a polyphonic sound to them. All right, here's the core three. Actually, there's core four that I want you to think of. So the whistle, trill, can you trill? Okay, buzz, bzzz, and then bury. How would I do bury? Bury is like, yes, oh my gosh, Susie. So I can see Susie. Susie just did the with your lips, okay? So a bury quality to it, okay? Almost like, oh my gosh, if you ever listen to Marian McPartland in piano jazz, she had that like rough voice, kind of sound to her. So that burry, almost like a sore throat sound to it. Okay. So when I start to listen to sounds, I like to think of clear, buzz, burry, trill. Some birds have all of them as a mashup in their songs, which is just really amazing. So those are some other ways that you can start to break down what you're hearing and put words to it. If we start using common words about these qualities of sound that we're listening to, we'll be able to talk to each other more about what we're hearing and experiencing. Okay, Mr. Wren, shush. So again, taking these things and applying them back to our usual suspects is really key. If we get to know the vocalizations of the birds that we have experiences with every day, then when we start to have new birds come into our landscape, we'll be more aware of them. And that right side of our brain, that subconscious, will kick in and be like, hey, pay attention to that bird. So robin and chickadee are two great birds to start out with because they have all of those different types of songs and calls, different intensities of alarm. So they're an easy study to get you a really good foundation. All right, and the final thing that we're going to talk about here is like my favorite thing in the world. Oh my gosh, why do we not spend more time with behaviors? We get to know the bird and we check it off and we move on to something else. And, you know, we're on the bird walk and we want to get as many birds as possible on the list because that's what you do when you bird. What if we did a behavior walk instead and we ticked off as many behaviors as we possibly could? That would be pretty cool. So I think the more important question to ask, maybe even let go of the fact that you don't know what the bird is in front of you. Say you go visit someplace brand new and you don't know the bird. Instead of, I can't figure out what this is, ask this question. What is this bird doing and why? What can I learn from this moment with this bird? So there are all kinds of different things, from mating displays, like these two cardinals, they look like they're kissing. Well, that's pair bonding. They're feeding each other as a pair, cementing their bond together. Feeding, my friend loves to call this, you see this thrush up here with like a whole bunch of food items in its mouth. Well, it's not eating for itself. It's carrying groceries, is what my friend Anne Marie likes to say. It's bringing groceries somewhere. Follow it. Maybe you'll find a nest. It's definitely not eating just for itself, because all of those things would be gone. Oh my gosh, preening is just like, you want to talk about calm appreciation. Watch a bird preen or bathe. We're fortunate enough, we live right near a stream where we know the puddles, the spots, the pools that the birds come to, because there's a dogwood that hangs down over it and it provides great cover and then great perching areas after they come up out of the water to preen all those feathers, right? Nesting, flight. Maybe you get some weird bird like that one down low. That's a northern parula. It's folded in half. Why is it folded in half? I don't know. I got to figure this out. Its posture is telling us something. We're going to figure out what that is, spend a little bit more time and see what we can notice and start to wonder about. When we start to layer all these things together, we'll begin to notice different things. This is a series of pictures that I just love. So this is a warbler, maybe a vireo. I don't know. My friend didn't know, who sent it to me, and she didn't care. She was like, I don't even know what this bird is, but it was fascinating. She watched it forage. So the left side of the images are this bird foraging in an apple tree. Look at that middle one, how it's looking up and noticing, trying to figure out, oh, is there anything under that branch? And then she said, after it ate, after it spent some time foraging among the apple blossoms, it sat back and preened itself, and she got to watch it there for quite some time. So really slowing down and just kind of being in the moment. Once you notice these things, then you know what to look for from there. All right, Susie, you ready for another book to put in the chat? Okay, this is my favorite set of books, and they've been printed in a bunch of different ways. This is the Stokes Nature Guide series. It's a guide to bird behavior. There are 3 volumes. These are amazing. Okay. So I have them all tabbed out by, different birds. So here's robin. What I love is they give you the phonology for the behaviors, what time of year you can see them in this really awesome chart. And they give you these crazy little drawings of the postures and the poses. And when I slow down and I spend time, I make a couple little notes about what I'm seeing. I may not know what's happening in that moment, but I've got some great resources to help me. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen something I've been like, I wonder what's going on there. I'll go get my Stokes books when I get home. And each time I do, I discover some new behavior or some new display that I've never seen before. And then I see it all over the place. It's great. I get to know to look for it in other birds as well. All right. And as we wrap up here together, I'm going to leave you with 2 things. I'm going to leave you with this little list as well as all the other little things that we've talked about. And I'm going to leave you with my favorite quote that really kind of connects with what slow birding is. So the other piece of this that I found, I'm really not into yoga. I don't do the breathing exercises, but you know what? When I slow bird, I'm doing all of that and I don't even know it. And honestly, slow birding has been, every time I think about this, I get a little choked up. It's been huge for me through this pandemic. This practice of 20 minutes of allowing birds to call me into awareness has helped me through the hardest times this past year. So mindful birding, slow birding is really like letting go of that drive to list, to get to the end of that trail and have as many bird species on your list as possible. What if it was just one great experience with a cowbird that you had, right? Let the birds present themselves. Maybe she's got a little tiny fold-up camp chair in that backpack and she's just going to park it on the side of the trail for a little bit. Birds come to her. Make time to do this. I think tell people during the course, you're going to spend 20 minutes. It's like, oh my God, how am I going to get that in? I'm going to do that. There's just not, right? And after a while, when you do make the time, then you crave it. You crave that connection, that time to sit and relax and breathe, and maybe sometimes leave the binoculars behind. This is crazy maddening for really experienced birders. They hate this. I dare you to try it. Go out one day and don't bring your binoculars. See what happens to you. It'll be so good. All right, I'm going to leave you with this quote. This is from a piece that Wendell Berry wrote in 1971 from an essay called An Entrance to the Woods. And this is what he says. The faster one goes, the more strain there is on the senses, the more they fail to take in, the more confusion they must tolerate or gloss over, and the longer it takes to bring the mind to a stop in the presence of anything. Let your passion and connection with birds slow you down and take you to a deeper place this year. I hope that some of the things that I've shared with you today, that there's one that you can just grab onto and take with you outdoors tomorrow and give it a try. And I hope if you're curious after this tonight, that you will join me for the 4-week course that is being offered with the Harris Center that's coming up in May. And finally, you can get in touch with me anytime, all over social media. My email is really easy to remember. It's birddiva@gmail.com. I love a good mystery. I love audio recordings. I love crappy photos where there's only half of a bird, right? I love those things. I love figuring them out with other people. So please feel free to reach out to me at any time. Susie and Phil and everybody at Harris Center, thank you so much for having me. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we can open up to some questions.
Yeah, we do have some questions. Bridget, I just want to thank you. That was just almost like revolutionary. It was wild. I loved it. And
Good.
there's lots of love coming in the chat about it. And I really can't wait to wake up tomorrow and try my hand in a different way of birding. And Katie has a question for you. She wants to know, how long did it take you to kind of change your mindset from being kind of a competitive birder to this different way of encountering birds?
Um, yeah. Oh gosh, Katie, that's such a great question. So I think this has been evolving for me probably over the past 10 years. And when I really started to believe in having confidence in talking about this shift and being able to put this out there as an alternative was probably, yeah, probably about, I want to say like 5 or 6 years ago. And you know what? It's not easy. I've been mocked by other birders. I've had somebody say, "Oh, Bridget's doing yoga birding now," which I'm like, yeah, I am. And it's awesome. So it's hard, right? Because you get in this mindset of this is how you do it. I think that's why, for me, I started digging into how birding started, how the culture and the community developed, how we can kind of make birding more accessible to everyone. The other piece that was big for me were people that were like, when I would say to them, "Are you a birder?" They'd be like, "Oh no, I'm not a birder." Right. But as you talk to them, you found out that they were really into birding. So it made me ask, what's turning people off about birding? I think the culture is changing, and we're a little bit more open to different ways of defining birding and bird watching. Yeah.
Bridget, I saw on your fabulous website, which I'll put in the chat as well, that you're going to be doing a talk on those women and birding. And I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about that class
Yeah.
course you're having or program you're doing.
Yeah, so I have this great relationship with the Nature Museum in Grafton, Vermont. And each year, probably for the past 6 years, they let me try something new. They're like my little laboratory for new stuff. And so as I started to look at the history of birding, I started to discover that there were women's stories that weren't being told. And I kept thinking about, right, like I know Rachel Carson, and I hear all these names over and over again, Aldo Leopold and Emerson and Thoreau. And there were certain, writers that I could get into and connect with, but there was always something missing. So it was really about digging into this missing piece. And that's when I discovered Florence Miriam Bailey. And she is credited with being the first person to write a field guide in North America. It was called Birds Through an Opera Glass. Oh my gosh. Well, and during that talk, I don't have it right here, but I found a pair of opera glasses like the ones that she looked through, and I bought them for myself for Christmas because I was so intrigued by her approach, which is totally the slow birding approach. Go sit somewhere, be in nature, and observe and make notes. And so all three of the women that I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, Mabel Osgood Wright, Florence Miriam Bailey, and Olive Thorne Miller, were all women who were the first three women that were allowed membership into the American Ornithology, American AOU, American Ornithology Union, right? And they wrote articles for the Auk in Bird Lore, which is the original form of Audubon magazine. And I just thought we pushed all their work aside. We've lost telling those stories. We've lost that connection with how those people birded and had practiced birding. And they fought for it too. Oh my gosh, Olive Miller is super saucy. Anyways, that's like, it's coming together. It's going to be in 2 weeks. I'm so excited about that, and to carry that into my future work. I'm doing a book club too, where we're reading those kind of lost stories of female ornithologists who have kind of been pushed to the background after all this time.
Love it. And here's the final question for tonight. And if you say no to this, I hope you might consider, but Nadia wants to know if you have a podcast.
Oh my gosh. Back in the day, before podcasts were podcasts, I had a podcast when they first started out, when I was with Audubon Vermont. This was early 2000s. Man, and it was a lot of fun. There's a ton of birding podcasts out there. I'll just say it. I have an inkling of an idea that's percolating, and I just don't have the bandwidth yet to put it together. But there may be a podcast in the future. So I'll just leave it at that. And thank you, Nadia, because that just makes me think, yeah, I should do that.
I want to thank you, Bridget. This was absolutely fabulous. Just your passion and the way you spoke right from your heart about your own experience. I think it really resonated with so many of us, and your knowledge and the tips. So I'm so grateful, and I'm so happy that you'll be doing some more work with the Harris Center. And I look forward to having you again and again. So I hope you're a regular at the Harris Center.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And maybe one day when we can all be together, you can actually come and do a course in person, which would be so fun.
I would love to. Thank you so much.
Welcome. And thank you to everybody who showed up tonight and was here for this inspirational treat. This was fabulous. And hopefully we'll see you out on some other programs or out slow birding with your beach chair. So good night, everybody. Have a nice
Good night,
evening.
you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.